Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with my inevitable co-host Teos Abadia.
It
Teos,
was
thanks for coming back for
destiny.
yet another week.
And coming back was the trick because I had to drive up to Seattle and back down all in one day to take my daughter and her friend to the Taylor Swift concert. And that
Did
was a
you did
cool
you attend
scene.
as well?
I did not, which I
Yeah.
wish I had. I got to
Uh,
drive. I was just the chauffeur, but I did get to see my friend Derek Gooder,
mhm.
who was the event manager for Gen Con, hung
Oh,
out in his gaming pad and dreamed that my gaming pad could somehow look like his. But what was awesome was just seeing like the crowd around it. Like it was a bit like there was a year at Gen Con when there was a football game and Gen Con, and you got to see the two
mhm.
crowds mix. So there were Mariners fans and Taylor Swift fans
Yeah.
arriving at the same time, baseball and Taylor Swift, and it was great. So you'd see like people like all in glittery, awesome costumes and like Barbie lookalikes and a lot of really
Yeah.
cool stuff like that. There was a really neat vibe
Right.
to it. And
And
then the
then there was the
Mariners.
Taylor Swift concert. Ba-dooch. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh,
yeah, no.
sorry.
Hmm.
That the Gen Con story was the best because it was a Colts preseason game and Gen Con. So we had cosplaying people, and there were football fans with fright wigs and the face paint of the team, like on the phone saying, "You can't believe what I'm looking at right now!" Like as they're all painted up with
Yeah,
the Indianapolis blue and silver, I think. And
yeah.
it was quite an ironic moment, let's say.
I was walking with a friend of mine, and he said,
Good
"You know,
times.
some of these jocks are saying, 'Didn't we beat these guys in high school? Why are they still around us?'" That was very funny.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We
we're not that
we
different when we
keep
really
coming
look at
back. We
it.
exactly. But we do have a lot to get to today, so let's jump into it, including some listener corner missives. First, from Megan J via Patreon Discord. How do you respond when the players bite really hard on a hook that you didn't intend to be a hook? In one of my campaigns, a player has become fixated on a reference to an ancient deity that was really only intended as some throwaway background material. Now I feel like I need to include this ancient deity in a campaign intended for a non-theistic setting, i.e., Ravenloft. And that's a really good question.
Great question.
And it comes up more often than you would think if you DM. And for me, it depends on the situation. If I'm running a one shot, if I'm running a timed event of a very specific adventure where I need to stick close to the text, then I'm just going to say, listen, this is not a tree that you want to be barking up right now. That usually, it's usually a merciful thing where
Yeah.
people could just like, okay, we'll get to where we're supposed to be. However, if you can see a clear path forward, or if you are running a home game or an adventure that you created and you have the flexibility to look ahead and say, you know what, was expecting them to do this, but they're really interested in this. Let me just move this piece over here, and now they get to follow their own thread. They get to feel like they've really achieved something, and all I'm doing is moving up one piece to another piece. So yeah.
Yeah. I had a nightmare of a time once with running a table for kids. They were in middle school at that time, and this was like a neighborhood group. And this one girl, her dad decided he wanted to play, and he played like a lot of AD&D. So we were all playing, and it's just the beginning of this adventure. And I don't even know why this adventure has a tavern scene, but it starts in a tavern, and it describes that it's a two-story tavern. And so she says, can I go to the second floor? And I'm like, it's closed off because I just didn't want to waste time there, right?
Mm.
And she
Right.
says, I try to figure out why it's closed off. And I'm like, oh, you just see like a staff person. She's cleaning upstairs. So I was trying to convey it's closed, right, for cleaning. She wanted to
Mhm.
murder this employee of the tavern because clearly something nefarious is going on. And it just kept going and going. And the father, meanwhile, is horrified at all the terrible things that his daughter wants to do. And I took way too long to say, stop, there's nothing happening, right? And I'm because I tried to stay in the game and in the world, and And I think I was thinking too much about how the dad was reacting. It took forever, and finally I was like, "There's nothing happening here. Like, we need to go to the next part of this adventure."
Yeah.
But
Right.
there is
And
also the
rather than
situation.
spending 20 minutes doing it,
Yeah,
right, you could have
yeah,
just said, "There's nothing up there."
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's now
and
that you mention it, in adventures that I've run where there've been, like, kids and parents, so many times, many more times than I would have assumed, it's the adults who are going off in the wrong direction rather than the kids.
that's
And I
funny.
don't know if it's because of a play style or trying to, like, show the kids how to think, but, it's generally the adults that are like, "Ooh, I need to investigate this," and the kids are like, "No, let's just go to the dungeon." And, "Oh, but no, we need to stock up on supplies, or
Mhm.
we need to ask the sheriff about the," and generally, it's the kids who are correct,
Yeah.
that just wanna get to the adventure, so that's odd.
I love the stories of, like, murdering grandmas where, like, they just, play the barbarian and wanna
Mhm.
murder everything they find. That's always great. But, yeah, I think there are those times
Yep.
when, like this situation that's described here, this sounds really cool. The idea of going off of this mistaken understanding because it sounds rich and fun. And sometimes that's the best thing, right? You describe the NPCs in the tavern and you do some throwaway and they go for the throwaway. It's like, well, I guess that's what has the plot points because you're clearly more interested in this NPC than the other ones that I was interested in. Move it over there, develop something, tie it into the person's backstory or whatever, right? Because it's obviously got some personal interest
Yeah.
level. So yeah.
Yeah. For the in the Ravenloft example, if I'm remembering correctly, Ravenloft is more about the dark powers that are sort of behind the scenes. And so it could be that these dark powers are over the years, over the centuries, given form from time to time in a specific deity.
Hmm.
That's really just them putting themselves forward as something. So you could do something like that and then reveal that as you go as the characters investigate this. And even further back there was this other deity that's sort of similar, and then slowly reveal that there's no deities, it's just these horrific powers that are behind the scenes pulling strings.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Next we have Kurt Ugal via YouTube, who says, a question. I have two players that asked me to allow them to use long played characters. They started at level 2 and went to level 20 over 2 years. In a new two-player story, as the past group never gelled and allowed for fulsome character exploration. I warned that to do this successfully, the players would only use the bare bone concept of their characters, and that everything, including background and character story revelations, would all play out very differently. Have you ever had a similar request, and what advice would you give, please? Yeah, I've had this happen on a number of occasions where we finish a campaign and they want to keep playing those characters. And it's not unnatural for people to want to dwell in what they know, or at least to start from what they know and move forward. So the first question I would ask these players is always why?
Mm.
Why do you want to continue playing these characters? And the answer to that question will then uh, give me a ground on which to start asking more questions. So the first question is why. Then when they tell me, I can do two things. One, I can figure out if I'm interested in doing what they want. And two, I can figure out if a role playing game campaign is really what they want. Because what sometimes people want when they have inhabited this character for so long is they want to explore this character more. And a role playing
Yeah.
game is not necessarily the best way to do that. Uh, Fan fiction would be better to explore the past of this character than try to move forward with some another version of the character. Now, if the player just loves the concept that they put together in terms of the class and the race and all that, then sure, it's going to be completely different. But here we go. Uh, So that's just sort of the
Yeah.
vague answer, but you really need to know why they want this, because if you don't know why they want to do this, there's a good chance you're going to end up moving in a direction that's either not good for them or not good for you, or maybe even not good for both.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Kurt had added in a reply comment, my best two players love their characters so much that they asked to play them again as a restart in a collaborative setting that more fulsomely incorporates their backstories and NPCs into new and shared locale. Most of all, they want the missions and themes that would suit their characters, as those were often rejected by other players in the previous group. And
Mm,
and yeah, and so I think that, anytime you have players that are really excited to do something with their characters, it's cool. But I would want to talk through those the parts that might be a little sticky, right? Because there might be some repetitiveness that or some expectations they have, and if you're really doing a restart, then things might go differently, and you just want to make sure to stay on top of that so that you don't end up suddenly creating a disappointment because they had such firm expectations of what this restart would do. But like I've got a couple of characters that I've played in Adventurers League that I will take into streams very often and just use them at whatever level they might be. And I just sort of pretend that this is sort of like flashback or something, Um,
mhm.
because I like those characters and I like playing with them and exploring them, and I don't, I leave the past behind or in the future behind or whatever, and I just focus on this particular piece, and pretend everything else is sort of backstory the way you would if you just made it up and never played them before.
Right. And if the players do like the concept, it can be fun to explore that concept in a different way. So
Yeah.
if you have your right character that sees the future, uh, and it came worked out one way, then play it in a different way. You can use the same concept, the same voice, the same mannerisms, all that stuff that the actor likes to do, but
Yeah.
just turn it on its head and have a new spin on it, and see if you can have fun as you did the first time, but with a different, the same character traits, but a different story that goes along with it.
Yeah.
Next, Michael Kremen via the Patreon chat. Quick question. During an interview, it was mentioned that there is data showing most games don't go past lower levels, I think tier 2. How do you guys know that? Just curious. Great show. Happy to be a Patreon. Teos, I'm going to let you take this away.
And I don't remember the exact dates, but there were at least two major Wizards of the Coast surveys that took place. I think one was 3E and one was during 4E that showed strong data behind this, right? And this was communicated by Wizards of the Coast. I know Mike Merles talked about it once in one of his development posts during D&D Next, and there were some other discussions of them as well. Um, and one of the surveys was sort of like a in the past we didn't do the best job of surveys. We really dug into with experts to find out how people play, and here's what we found, kind of things. um, and since that time we see a number of repeating survey questions where they also ask about this, and I think it's very telling that they keep getting these answers because they keep sort of narrowing the focus, and when they do high level they find a sort of way to do it, but not they're not giving you a 20 level experience with an adventure they publish for a number of reasons, but including that they just don't see those play levels. We also saw the D&D Beyond data that has been shared, where it shows like how what levels are created, right? That and there's some people who just create a level 20 character because they are testing out their build. But even with that, people are making lots and lots of low level characters, and that's what they're really playing.
Yeah. And sales numbers,
Yeah,
also on the DMs Guild and sales numbers elsewhere really reinforce this. And obviously, there are people that want high level content, high
yeah,
level
yeah,
adventures, and that's fine to want it. Um, and it's just a market reality, if you will, that
yeah,
making that you're not going to make the sales that you would if you made lower level content that more people are interested in having. And also, people that use level 20 content are generally experienced game masters, and we know that most experienced game masters like to create their own stuff too.
Yeah.
So that's another reason that this doesn't sell as well.
And it is possible to make a niche out of it, right? So like 2C Gaming makes a lot of products that are for high level play, and they are very well received, and they do well because they're really focused on it and really trying to make a name for themselves in that area. But in general, most people we know who create, if they have a low level adventure and they have a high level adventure, it's the low level one that'll sell way, way more than the high level. And I don't know anybody who says otherwise of the designers that in our kind of close group that we talk to often. I mean, it's not a great way to make money. It's kind of a way to be sad because you also have to do so much more work to think through all the things that high level characters do. And even DMs aren't super comfortable with it. So, like in Adventurers League play through Baldwin Games, it's very common that there are a lot of DMs that want to run low level play or mid levels. Get to the high levels, fewer and fewer DMs feel comfortable running it, even if they've been running for years for Baldwin Games. And so that's also really telling that just the DMs feel like it's more of a chore, which is unfortunate. And I think historically, there's less practice play testing going on with at the company side with high level play. True of kind of all RPGs that support levels. And so a lot of times in addition, that is the roughest part of the addition, unfortunately. And that leads to all these factors as well.
And last but not least, Falcon Neil via the Patreon. I started playing in 1976 and have been playing actively for every edition change since. To me, there are some very valid game reasons, as opposed to financial reasons, why editions have to change. There have been basic flaws in the rules, which degrade the game. Rules can get stale. There can be book bloat where rules are spread across too many books. Power creep can happen from unanticipated synergies. Also, the game can get complex from so many books, so you need to re-baseline to get all the rules in one place. Is it just inevitable that every so
Mm.
many years something will force an edition change? Do you feel that 5e had reached the point of needing an update? Whew, big
Yeah,
question.
huge.
Um, if you pull together everything that we've been talking about for the last year and a half, 2 years, you could sort of know our answers on this already. And the first part of my answer is to dismiss business reasons in any analysis is almost impossible because I think that's the main driving reason behind past edition changes, not just in D&D, but in countless role-playing games. We see movie reboots, franchises rebooting constantly, uh, video games coming out with new versions or new reboots, new
Mhm.
sequels, whatever. So the business reason is overarching, probably always going to be the driving force. What do you think, Teos?
Yeah, absolutely. I always think it's interesting that the number of versions for Shadowrun and D&D are basically the same. You can quibble on a few little
Mhm.
variants, what is an essentials, what is a, the light version Shadowrun role playing game. I forget the name right now. But it's just because what happens is the traditional model is, you sell your core book, people are super excited. You start selling source books, and some people want a particular source book, but not 100%. And as you continue to create down the line, your numbers just drop. So at some point you have to relaunch. 5e was probably the first major RPG that seemed to avoid that for quite some time, where you had Jeremy Crawford saying years in, hey, we are selling more than ever before. It's the only one. And I don't think anyone knows why that is. I mean, you can say 5e is a great addition, sure, but it kind of broke the rules for some time, but time is inevitable and it's cruelty. And
Mm,
eventually, you
yeah.
just don't need that source book and you don't need that thing and you start tiring of it. And what 5e is in a very interesting place because it's the most popular version, best selling, best business angle of any edition ever. It's really precarious to try to tweak it, right? And you can see how the people at Wizards and would have all this reticence around making big changes because if you mess with it and you release something that's a dud, I mean, why did you do that? And we know from every single edition change of basically any game ever, but especially D&D, that anytime you say new edition, people go nuts, right? Some people go like, "You're changing everything I loved. I hate this," or And so it's almost like you can't win, right? If you change editions, getting people to switch is really difficult. If you stay the same, then you're prolonging all those problems that were just mentioned by Falcon Neal, because you've got more of that. And that's what we're seeing, right? Is we're seeing a timeline where we're maybe getting to where a number of people would like a new edition, but 5e is so good, and D&D is going to give you sort of more of the same, which prevents that switch effect but tires you a bit. And there's no perfect answer to it. It's just it is what it is. I mean, my perfect answer, Shawn, I've said that here, is I would have done 2024 as an anniversary edition, 99% cosmetic change, and just a few little fixes, tiny fixes, to just buy time while still selling books and pumping up the brand and whatever, and then launch more of what would feel like a 6e later. But that's not to say that would work. That's just my dream, my scheme. But
Yeah.
uh, they've got rooms full of people to think through that.
Yeah. And doing it that way, and I agree, doing it that way is better. But to do it that way, you can't announce a new edition,
Right?
because announcing a new edition brings up all of these issues.
Yeah.
Whether on the positive side, if people are excited for it, that's great, but they can't buy the new edition when you announce it.
Yeah.
And if they're upset about it, they stop buying everything, start playing other games, you know remove themselves from the hobby. So yeah, a nice 50th anniversary, not even the same rule set, right? A 50th anniversary board game, a 50th
Yeah.
anniversary anything other than redoing the game. Do I think it was necessary? No. Do I game wise, rules
Hmm.
wise, I don't think it was necessary. I think there are still I think I don't think we reached the point where people found enough problems in mass with the rules that
Hmm.
were ready to switch. And that was because of the slow release of content. That I think had a lot to do with it. Some people were very upset that we weren't getting more material more quickly, but the sort of one adventure per year, or
Hmm.
one adventure and then one very small supplement per year, was working really, really well for Wizards. And I think, among many other reasons, that's why we saw that steady increase in play. We didn't get rules bloat too quickly, so people could still access the game more easily. And this push at the end to put out more and more content, I think, is might have been done on purpose, A, to get more content out there, and B, to make the game more bloated, and so that more people would want a refresh. And
Yeah.
so if someone did that, kudos, more power to you.
Very
You
smart. Yeah.
outsmarted me. Uh yeah, and everyone. But
Yeah.
it is inevitable. And at some point, whatever 5e, 2e, 5e revised, whatever we end up having it known as, there is a sixth edition out there somewhere.
Yeah.
It is pretty much inevitable, assuming that they they being the owners of D&D, whoever that is, whether it's Wizards or Hasbro or some other company in the future,
Hmm.
will want to make money. So it will happen.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You can't not have that happen, because no game can continue selling forever. And it's true of anything, right? If you buy a pair of sneakers, you probably won't buy the same pair of sneakers for the rest of your life over and over again. You'll change it up. And so if you're that sneaker brand, you want to be the one changing it up so that they stay within your area, right? So
Yeah.
the game has to evolve. We've seen that, right? We would not want to buy, most of us, 2E right now, right? We
Mhm.
would we would say, well, I would need something a little more modern than that. Well, that's what people will say of 5E someday, right?
Mhm. It's true. Thank you to all our listeners and all our patrons out there for those questions. And now we will get to our news and commentary section, starting with one of our own listeners who has created a dungeon generator. JL, who is a Patreon supporter, wrote to us with this. After listening to Teos and Shawn review the random dungeon tables on a recent episode, I took some time to build out random dungeon generator that accounts for previous rolls to determine future ones. The way it works is pretty simple. The rolls you make early impact the rolls after, and you lock the values as you scroll down. The dungeon type defines the scope of what rolls you can make and so on. So there are 15 dungeon types, 175 unique dungeons, around 3 or 4,000 events based on those dungeons. Monsters, defenses, and treasure are impacted by the original purpose of the dungeon, as well as recent events. So this is amazing. You can
Amazing.
find this tool at www.tileforge.com/generators/dungeon generator.
Those are forward slashes, but yes.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm slash happy.
But yeah, and there are a bunch of other awesome generators there, including they just added an NPC generator that's also really cool. But the dungeon generator is so perfect because it goes into that discussion we had of, you know,
Mhm.
what if this operated in a more, interesting way? And also that idea of like how much should you be trying to do on paper versus digitally, right? It can be really
Mhm.
different in that way. And yeah, really, really cool to see the tool and think about how that compares to the written DMG.
Yep. So thank you, JL, for that. And JL has a Patreon as well, so
Mhm.
you can support and follow their work there. You know, Gen Con's coming, I've heard.
What?
As I go and try to figure out my schedule and try to avoid conflicts of meetings and games, and that's turning into its own special nightmare.
Mhm.
But I'll tell you what, if you're going to Gen Con, you're going to have a blast because we have all sorts of events, including ones for D&D. You wanna take over here? You did the legwork
Yeah,
on this one.
there's a little bit of a mystery because you'd think Wizards sort of back in January was saying like, oh, we're going to be at conventions and we're going to tell you what we're doing, and then there've been a few things that you're kind of like, you had a good intent, but you haven't really deployed it right. Where it's the learn to play events in stores that was a little rough, and now we kind of know what the D&D events are at Gen Con through Magic the Gathering's blog entry last week, or Baldwin or Gen Con's blog entry last week, and nothing really official from the D&D side, but and it's kind of seems like most of the energy is on Magic the Gathering, which is interesting. But I guess it is 30 years of Magic the Gathering, and you can of course have the Baldman Games events to play, which is always true. So there's a link in our show notes and also on those blogs that leads you directly to find all of the possible games you can play. New this year is a D&D Live, a giant-sized adventure event on Saturday. Seats up to 500, includes food and drink. Not entirely sure what that is. Are you just watching people play? Is it interactive in some way? Not clear. Probably it's a live play that you watch. There is a Wizards of the Coast food truck that is part of the sort of outdoor area that Gen Con is setting up. Wizards of the Cones, and there are treats inspired by various D&D and Magic the Gathering personages. So there's Tasha and Drizzt, names stuck on a food item.
Mhm.
Fun. Wizards is sponsoring the cosplay contest, and so there is an extra prize category beyond normal years for the best cosplay featuring an iconic Magic the Gathering or D&D character or monster. And then on Thursday there's a D&D movie screening. And I am told by all the sources I can reach out, there is still going to be a D&D summit gathering at this con. When will D&D tell us anything about it? I don't know. But in theory, at some point, people will be invited to it. It may just be whoever happens to be standing outside the door whenever they finally announce it. I don't know. I know it's tough at organizations to make decisions, but this is the kind of stuff I deal with in my day job, all the time. But boy, someone just needs to say, "Hey, in January you set up your Gen Con plan and you communicate it in
I
February because that's when people need to know to plan to attend these things."
Yeah, every convention's obviously different, and sometimes I'll meet somebody playing D&D and I'll be like, "Hey, I'm going to this convention. I'm going to Winter Fantasy." You could buy a badge and get into games right up
Oh
until
yeah.
the day it starts, or a local convention. Gen Con is not that beast. If I'll have people say, "Oh, I 2 weeks to Gen Con. I'm kind of interested in maybe going." I'd be like, "Well, good luck finding a hotel in Chicago, and every event is sold out." And it's been so for months. And you can excuse the people that don't understand how big Gen Con is and what the timing is. But a lot of these groups, they know this. They've
Yeah.
been to Gen Con over and over and over again. And it's doing a disservice to the fans to not have this information out there sooner, so that people A, know what they're going, to do when they're there, and B, just know what's going to be there.
Yeah.
It's sort of mind-boggling
Yeah.
to.
I mean, event registration was in May. Hotels before
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Those are the dates, and whatever internal squabbles are going on in your organization, you need to come up with a plan before that and get those. And honestly, it's better for everybody. And this is something I often try as a
right.
consultant to tell organizations: like, yeah, it's super painful, but you will be better off telling everybody internally, sorry, the gate is closed. We're done. You want to come up? You want your team to attend next year? You want tell me for next year, but this year's done. Like we've decided, we've communicated, it's over. And you should really force yourself to just do that and get those plans out there because right now nobody's gonna very few people would even consider suddenly going to a Gen Con to Gen Con because of something D&D is doing. And even if they did, they're probably already booked or they can't find hotels and it'd be a nightmare. And so you're just gonna disappoint people about what they
Yeah.
can't do, can't get into, can't attend. So yeah, it's unfortunate. And for the summit, I mean, I don't know, what the you need to the summit already has a little bit of an issue of that it needs to target the right people, I think, for future events. And how would D&D even know who's attending Gen Con to even invite the right people at this point? So mm,
Yeah. There's an old question in like organized play D&D world, which is, what's worse, a bad D&D game or no D&D game? And I've had vicious arguments about this, and it sort of fits here, right? What's
yeah.
worse, no Wizards of the Coast presence or a bad Wizards of the Coast presence? Uh,
And it's a shame because
we
I can't even imagine how much money must be spent on just the things we mentioned.
Right.
And so when you misspend like that, it just hurts all the efforts, right? Because then what ends up happening is there'll be like no budget for packs or no budget for who knows what else, where it could be applied well. And you can get a lot done with small spends if you do them smartly. But if you blow them all on something that then you can't even do the small smart spends anymore because the budget's gone and
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. And I'm praying that it will be great, and that
mhm,
Wizards will look good and draw in new
yeah.
people and heal some of the damage from various catastrophes along the way. Uh, but knowing about what's going to be there is the first step, and hopefully we've done our part now in spreading some of the what's going to be there, and we hope that
Mhm.
it's enjoyable.
Yeah. Hopefully it's good.
Yep. From Gen Con to eOne, Hasbro has closed the D&D eOne office in the UK. We've talked about eOne many times before. It is the entertainment arm of Hasbro. They worked on the D&D movie. They've worked on other entertainment projects. So in the UK, eOne operates their theatrical operations. It was releasing 35 films a year less than a decade ago, and last year it released 4. And there's also been a decline in revenue uh, on that. So the eOne also maintains a UK TV and home entertainment presence, though it's not clear if this will remain or will be pulled along with the D&D eOne offices there. Thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, this all happens at a time when Hasbro is trying to sell off eOne. So they're maybe trying to lighten the load of what it is, and the cost basis of it. Lionsgate has been signaled as a possible buyer, but this is a place that Hasbro purchased eOne in 2019 for $4 billion. It sold some parts of it already, um, and and it's clearly hasn't gotten what it wanted out of it, and maybe smartly is saying, hey, this, if you look at the business now and you see what people are doing in streaming, what people are doing in movies, this is a really uncertain time. It's really hard to make money. There are really big players there, and to become a big player maybe wasn't the slam dunk that one might have thought of in 2019. So maybe it is the right time to get out. It's still painful. still, still doesn't sound like they got their money's worth for $4 billion. Um, and in the era of movies, movies always sound so big and Hollywood feels so big, but this line from a New York Times article on video games was really interesting. And I've heard variations of this before, so this is perhaps stronger than previous ones. The video game industry now accounts for significant chunks of the economy. It is larger than music, US book publishing, and North American sports combined. Microsoft's game division and Activision Blizzard each make more money annually than all US movie theaters.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah. The only thing that we're going to get to the sports portion of our show. The only thing that surprised me was throwing in North American sports
yeah,
because the NFL is massive. The NFL prints money
yeah,
and billions of dollars. And uh, so being larger than that just on its own is shocking. And add all of those things, book publishing, I'm not surprised.
uh,
Music, the way, we've
it's bizarre.
gone, not surprised. But wow, that's a lot of money.
Yeah, and this may be revenue versus profit, right? Because I think sports, one of the
Mm,
nice things is sports is very reliably profitable for those entities.
right.
So, yeah,
Yep. Other news, we have Paizo closing its Redmond office. Paizo president Jim Butler had a blog update covering topics from the union to the org license to reorganization between the teams. I guess several teams have been merged according to Butler's blog. Customer service has been put into sales, organized play into marketing, marketing into sales and operations. Butler said that, yes, that teams had not been working the way that they should previously, and now that everything should be more smoothly flowing. The creative team also saw a merge. This helps them create different games, like the upcoming board game that they're working on, as well as all of their role playing game products. Butler also said that almost all of the staff has been remote since the pandemic, so that they're closing these offices and moving their warehouse in order to consolidate and save money.
I mean, it makes sense from a number of perspectives, including that, when the union was being formed, some of the big discussion points there were around how it was a very unhealthy environment, both in the way that managers and staff interacted and in the physical things like how the carpets were and the ventilation systems. So maybe it really is one of those like,
Yeah.
let's just let's never come back to this office and find better ways to work online, which is what a lot of role playing game companies are doing anyway, right? Is they aren't big enough to be in an office, and so they work online anyway. And Paizo may be shrinking a little bit, so that may make a lot of sense.
As someone who's worked remotely since the last century, since the last millennium,
Yeah,
technically, uh, I can say that it saves a lot of time, money, mental effort, mental stress, lots and lots of things, as long as the right person is doing the right job. Uh,
yeah,
it works out very well. It can work out very well. So
yeah. It's been
hopefully it works for them.
more than a decade for me of being remote, decade and a half, something like that.
Mhm. Cobalt Press is hiring a media production manager. They want to produce and maintain original content for YouTube and TikTok, among others. There's a job posting at cobaltpress.com with the details. This is a remote, speaking of remote, this is a remote full-time position. The salary, a little bit on the low side for the industry, between 47 and 57,000, but again, remote can definitely help offset some of those costs.
Mhm.
So if you are a media production manager or going to play one on TV, you can go to the Cobalt Press site and check that out. Any thoughts on that one?
No, yeah, I mean, I think the cold press jobs in general have been on the lower side of the industry comparatively.
Mhm,
Not just even comparing the wizards. But I mean, hopefully that's where Valiant will help them change that.
mhm. Last but not least, we are getting to the crowdfunding and the new releases. Crowdfunding in August. On August 7th is Shadow of the Weird Wizard. We have been talking about this previously. I think we even interviewed, or someone interviewed Rob a long time ago on the
Mm.
show. So Rob Schwalb will be kickstarting Shadow of the Weird Wizard, which is an enhanced and updated version of his Shadow of the Demon Lord role-playing game engine, but this one is suitable for all ages. For us, this is a must back. There is a
Yeah,
link in our show notes to the Kickstarter, so you can be notified when it actually launches.
I couldn't be more excited
What
about
else you got
this.
here?
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, one of the things that's
Mhm,
cool is the tweaking of the engine. I'm really interested to see because I already love Shadow of the
mhm.
Demon Lord. It's one of those, if I want to think of like how would I design an RPG, that's one of the ones that I would pull off the shelf. So to see it, you know, get to a slightly
Mhm.
different version, a slightly different take, that's super exciting for me.
Yeah.
Also coming is Jungles of Kuauhtla, the campaign guide. This is a 300 plus page campaign guide for 5th edition. Explore a wondrous world inspired by Latin American pre Columbian cultures, where an isolated civilization clashes with the horrific yet alluring jungles that surround him. And it really is this idea of like you're sort of in this bubble surrounded by dangerous jungle, and it looks really cool. The art looks amazing. The Kickstarter ends August 20th. We have a link in the show notes, or just search for Jungles of Kuauhtla. And then last is Where Evil Lives, the MCDM Book of Boss Battles for 5e. This launches on August 1st, provides 22 drop in dungeons with dynamic combat encounters for 5e. Pretty cool. And that's directly on
Okay,
BackerKit.
and that's backer kit via instead of Kickstarter.
Yeah, interesting.
Awesome. And there is our news for the week.